It is the winter of 1943, and somewhere over the Ruhr Valley, a Lancaster bomber is running out of time. The crew can hear the German night fighters before they see them, not with their ears, but in the cold mathematics of the radar operator's screen back at the Gomorrah line. 40 kilometers below, inside a concrete bunker lit by the blue glow of Würzburg radar dishes, a Luftwaffe controller is painting a precise picture of the sky. He knows the bomber's altitude. He knows its heading. He knows almost to the minute when his fighters will intercept it. The crew above have no idea they are already dead. This is how it works in the autumn and winter of 1943. For every 100 aircrew Bomber Command sends into Germany, nearly 4 do not come back. In 1943 alone, Bomber Command loses more than 7,000 aircraft. The mathematics are simple and savage. Fly enough missions and the odds will find you eventually. The men who climb into those aircraft know this. They climb in anyway. The Germans have built something extraordinary. The Gomorrah line, named after General Joseph Gomorrah, the architect of Germany's night defense, is a layered grid of radar stations stretching from Denmark to the Swiss border. Each Würzburg dish, a parabolic bowl nearly 3 meters across, can track a single aircraft with terrifying precision. Paired with a second dish tracking the incoming night fighter, a ground controller can talk a pilot onto a bomber within meters. The system is elegant, methodical, and lethal. It is, in the parlance of the engineers who study it, beautifully designed to kill people. What defeats it is strips of tin foil. The story of how the Royal Air Force came to drop aluminum confetti on the Third Reich begins not with a brilliant flash of invention, but with an argument that nearly prevented the whole thing from happening. By early 1942, British scientists already understood the fundamental weakness in the German radar system. Any radar works by sending out a pulse of radio energy and waiting for it to bounce back from a solid object. The crucial detail, the one that matters enormously, is that radar cannot easily distinguish between a large solid object, like a bomber, and a cloud of small metallic objects that happen to reflect radio energy at the same frequency. If you could flood the airspace with enough metallic chaff, the radar screen would fill with false returns. The real bomber would disappear into the noise. The concept was not new. A British scientist named Joan Curran, working at the Telecommunications Research Establishment at Malvern, had developed the practical theory into something that could actually be manufactured and deployed. The strips needed to be cut to precisely half the wavelength of the Würzburg radar, which operated at approximately 53 centimeters, meaning the strips needed to be cut to roughly 27 centimeters in length. Each bundle of strips, when released from an aircraft, would fall through the air and bloom into a radar return that looked, on a German screen, almost exactly like a heavy bomber. Release enough bundles, in sufficient quantities, at the right intervals, and you could fill a radar screen with ghost aircraft. You could make the entire bomber stream vanish into a blizzard of false signals. The strips were cut from aluminum foil backed with black paper, making them visible from the air for recovery if they fell on British soil, and invisible against dark skies when viewed from below. Each bundle weighed roughly 1 pound and contained 2,200 strips. The strips themselves were 27 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide, a dimension arrived at through meticulous testing rather than guesswork. The whole thing was so simple it was almost embarrassing. It cost almost nothing to manufacture. It required no power source, no complex mechanism, no trained operator beyond a man with a box and a window. It was, in the most literal sense, rubbish, and it worked perfectly. The RAF called it window. So why, if the concept was known and proven by early 1942, was window not used until the summer of 1943? The answer is one of the more remarkable examples of institutional paralysis in the history of aerial warfare. The delay was not technical, it was political, and it's centered on a fear so rational it becomes almost maddening in retrospect. If the British used window against German radar, the Germans would immediately understand how it worked, copy it, and use it against British radar during the Luftwaffe's own bombing raids on British cities. This argument was made forcefully and repeatedly, and it was not wrong. The Luftwaffe did have radar. British air defenses did depend on radar to vector fighter squadrons onto incoming bombers. The risk was real. What made the delay so painful in hindsight was that German scientists had independently invented exactly the same concept. They called it Duple, and the German High Command had suppressed its use precisely for the same reason. Both sides were sitting on the same idea, each terrified the other would use it first, each declining to deploy it in case it prompted retaliation. The deadlock broke because the losses became intolerable to ignore. By mid-1943, the strategic bombing campaign was threatening to hemorrhage so many experienced crews that its continuation as a coherent force was genuinely in doubt. Churchill's scientific advisor, Frederick Lindemann, Lord Sherwell, along with Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Portal, concluded that the calculus had finally shifted. The Luftwaffe's bombing campaign against Britain was, by 1943, a spent force. The risk of German retaliation using window was acceptable. The cost of continuing to send aircraft into the Ruhr without it was not. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The first operational use of window was authorized for the night of 24th July 1943 as part of Operation Gomorrah, the RAF's assault on Hamburg. What happened over Hamburg that night has been described by those who were there as the moment the sky changed. Each Lancaster and Halifax in the attacking force carried a supply of window bundles. The crews were instructed to drop one bundle per minute from the moment they crossed the Dutch coast. As the bomber stream pushed deeper into German airspace, the Würzburg screens at tracking stations along the route began to fill. Not with 30 or 40 bomber returns, but with hundreds, then thousands. The ground controllers, men who had spent years reading radar screens with practiced confidence, found themselves staring at images that made no sense. Aircraft that split into 10 aircraft that vanished and reappeared, aircraft that flew at impossible speeds and then hung motionless. One German radar operator's log, recovered after the war, noted simply many thousands of targets, indistinguishable from one another, control impossible. The night fighters, denied their ground guidance, were left to hunt visually in the dark over a blacked-out city. They found almost nothing. Bomber Command lost 12 aircraft that night, against a defending force that in any previous comparable raid would have expected to claim 5 or 6 times that number. Hamburg burned for days. The subsequent raids, also covered by window, contributed to a firestorm that remains one of the most destructive events in the history of aerial bombardment. The human cost was devastating, and recorded history does not soften it. But for the bomber crews, the relief was immediate and visceral. Men who had climbed into their aircraft expecting to die came back alive. The Germans adapted, as the Germans always did. Within weeks, their night fighter controllers had developed new freelance tactics, broadcasting commentary over radio so pilots could hunt independently without ground guidance. New radar systems operating at different wavelengths were accelerated into production. Window had not destroyed the Kamhuber line. It had simply shattered it long enough for Bomber Command to hit something critical before the defenses reconstituted. The American 8th Air Force adopted its own version, which they called Chaff, a name that stuck and remains in use today. American chaff was broadly similar in principle, but cut to match the frequencies of different German radar systems encountered during daylight bombing. The Germans deployed Duple operationally by late 1943, though by that point the Luftwaffe's strategic bombing capacity had so diminished that its practical effect on British radar defenses was limited. The concept, once released into the war, could not be unreleased. Every major air force in the world adopted it, refined it, and has maintained it as a fundamental element of electronic warfare doctrine ever since. Modern chaff, fired from dispensers on fast jets or launched from surface ships against incoming missiles, operates on exactly the same principle that Joan Curran worked out at Malvern in 1942. Cut the strips to half the wavelength of the radar you wish to defeat. Release them into the path of the incoming signal. Vanish into the noise. The physics have not changed in 80 years. The concept remains, at its core, the same handful of shredded tin foil that a Lancaster crewman tipped out of a chute over the North Sea in the summer of 1943. Surviving examples of window, original bundles, their black-backed foil still intact, can be found in the collections of the RAF Museum at Hendon in London and at the Imperial War Museum. They look like something a child might find in a Christmas cracker. They look like nothing. That is rather the point. Return for a moment to that Lancaster over the Ruhr in the winter before window. The crew does not know what the radar operator in the bunker below can see. They do not know how precise the picture is or how little time they have. They know only what every Bomber Command crew knew in that period, that the odds were against them, that the mathematics were brutal, and that someone somewhere was working on the problem. What they could not have imagined was that the answer would be so absurdly, almost insultingly simple. Not a new engine, not a faster aircraft, not a more powerful gun or a more sophisticated jammer. Strips of foil, 27 centimeters long, dropped from a window at the rate of 1 bundle per minute. The Würzburg dishes, those beautifully engineered instruments, those precision tools of lethal geometry, brought to their knees not by a superior technology, but by the electronic equivalent of throwing sand in someone's eyes. The Kamhuber line had cost millions of Reichsmarks and years of engineering. Window cost almost nothing and was ready in months. The Germans had thought of it first and talked themselves out of using it. The British had thought of it first and talked themselves out of using it. It took thousands of dead airmen to make both sides stop talking. On the night of 24th July 1943, Bomber Command tipped the first bundles into the dark over the North Sea, and the most sophisticated radar network in the world went blind. It has never fully recovered its sight.